All right, so let's talk about 9 and 12 in this problem. 9 can help you with 10, and I'm just going to give you some hints on 12. I won't actually go the whole way through and solve it because I do want you guys to kind of struggle with that one a little bit. So on number 9, a couple of things that are important to notice in this. First of all, I mentioned this in one of the earlier videos. Whenever I see one fraction in an equation, I immediately think I'm going to make everything be a fraction. So instead of being 35, I'm going to make it 35 over 1. And I do that so that it looks like all of the other terms. Second thing we're going to notice is you see this negative sign? So there's a couple of ways that you could rewrite that. I could rewrite it like this, with our negative sign in front of the 3, or I could rewrite it like this in front of the 5. Okay, so doesn't matter which way I do it, and you can choose either one. Since I already have it here, I'm just going to leave it. Then what I need to do from there is start cleaning this up a little bit. So I'm going to try to rewrite this so I don't see as many parentheses, right? So I'm going to distribute that negative 5. And what I get there is then negative 10g minus 35 over 3 equals. Now, you're probably going to kind of laugh at me when I do this, but I'm not going to actually distribute the 35 yet. Well, Mrs. Kopp, you just distributed the negative 5. You're right, I did. But here's why. So I notice that the two denominators in this fraction are common in some way, right? I mean, I could multiply this 3 by 7 and get negative 21. So what that tells me is I could do a couple of things. And I'm going to show you the long way to do this, and then there's a shorter way you could do this as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to get a common denominator here. So I'm going to multiply this fraction, top and bottom, by 7. So when I do that, I have negative 10g minus 35. Now I'm going to multiply all of that by 7 in just a second here, equals 21. And you know what? Let's multiply by negative 7 so that I get negative 21. So it's the same as the other fraction. And then equals 35 times 14 minus 3g over negative 21. Now the reason I did that is both fractions have the same denominator now. So what I can do is I can multiply both sides of this equation by negative 21. And notice I'm writing it as negative 21 over 1, just so that it looks like a fraction. And the same thing we talked about in one of the previous problems is this. I'm saying multiply this entire expression by negative 21 and then turn around and divide it by negative 21. Right? I'm saying the same thing here. Multiply this entire expression by negative 21 and then turn around and divide it by negative 21. So when I multiply and divide by the same number, they're just undoing each other. So this is really like multiplying by 1. So the beautiful thing with that is that what's left is going to be linear. And now I have, that's a 3g, not a 32. Now I could solve this equation using my linear strategies. So I'm not going to finish solving this one. You can use some of the other videos that I posted to help you if you're stuck. Work on distributing and combining your like terms and then isolating your variable. So number 12 is kind of a fun problem. Like I said, I don't necessarily want to go through the whole problem, but I want to get you at least started on the right track. So as I said in the previous problem, whenever I see one fraction in a problem, I turn everything into a fraction. So that means that this 11x, I want to write that as a fraction, so I'm just going to write it as 11x over 1. So what we talked about in the previous video was getting a common denominator throughout the entire problem. I would like to do that here. But here's the hard part, or the not necessarily hard part, here's the challenging part of this problem. Your common denominator is pretty large. It ends up being 58,443. So you think, Mrs. Kopp, there's got to be a smaller denominator than that, but there's not. So you have a little bit of work to do here, right? So what I'm going to start out doing is getting a common denominator in each of these expressions. So let me rewrite this so I have a little more space between each term. and then we'll talk about how we can get that common denominator. All right, so now that I have each term written with a little more space, I need to think about what would I have to multiply this fraction by so that my denominator is this number. Now you might be asking, how did I get that number? You can always get a common denominator by just multiplying all of your denominators together. And that's all I did. I did 23 times 11 times 33 times 7. And there's not a smaller one. I wish there were, but there's not. So once I've got that kind of figured out, then I'm going to go ahead and figure out what did I multiply each term by to get my desired common denominator. Well, in that case, the first term we're going to multiply by 2,541. How did I get that? Well, I just took 58,443 and divided by 23, and that told me what I needed to multiply by. So then on the second fraction, it'll be 5,313. And then this fraction, we're going to have to multiply by 58,443. Next up, we're going to multiply by 1,771. And then lastly, we'll multiply by 8,349. Okay, so here's where the hard work is going to come into play, because you're going to need to use your calculator here. Let's go ahead and multiply out each term. So I want to actually figure out what is negative 5x times 2,541. Distribute the 5,313. Multiply these two numbers together. Multiply these two numbers together and write that. And then all of them are going to have the same denominator of 58,443. So if you want to pause and actually try that and come back, you can check and see if we get the same numbers. So at this point, this is what we're looking at. And again, this is kind of a mess, but we can use the strategy we used in the previous video, and that is to multiply everything in this equation by 58,443 over 1. So think of it as multiplying every term by 58,443 over 1. You'll distribute it to each term. And the same thing that happened in the previous example is going to happen here. We're going to end up eliminating all of our denominators. So then what you're left with is negative 12,710x. The biggest thing you're going to make mistakes on here is forgetting to write x or a negative sign somewhere. So it's important that you just take your time. Don't make silly mistakes, because the numbers are so large, it's easy to kind of get overwhelmed. See, I forgot an x up here, and make a silly mistake. Okay, so I'm going to stop here, and you should be able to finish and get the solution that we showed you in the answers.